when we are communicating to other people, they're having an emotional response before they start being rational and start processing what's said. Data speaks, but stories will move people to action.
This is Because People Matter, a podcast about celebrating leaders who are harnessing the best of each of their team members while driving success in their organizations and communities. Hosted by Dr. Helen Fagan, each episode features interviews with individuals who are leading the way. If you're ready to learn the impact leading with emotional intelligence and intercultural competence can have in your business, or wish to hear inspiring examples, this is the podcast for you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Because People Matter. And today we have an individual, Salvatore Manzi, who specializes in communication, effective communication, especially in these complex times. How do leaders take complexity and create clarity out of it? One of the things he mentioned is emotion precedes cognition. He brings in the research both from neuroscience as well as communication and the impact of communication. I'm really excited for you to hear from him. We had a fantastic conversation. It could have gone on for hours, I tell you, but I'm not going to hold this up any longer. I want you to hear from him. And so join the conversation and please communicate with him directly. He loves hearing from people. So join in the conversation. Well, hello, Salvatore. Welcome to the Because People Matter podcast.
Thank you, Helen. It's great to be here.
I am really excited to have this conversation with you. I've been looking forward to it since you and I chatted. I think it was last week that we chatted about this. And so for our audience who doesn't know who you are, would you introduce us to who is Salvatore Manzi?
Thank you, Helen. I grew up in Kansas in the Midwest, and it shaped and influenced so much of who I am today. But my father was a speaker. He went to conferences and spoke, and that inspired me to get up on stages as well. So in college, I began speaking on multiculturalism and other topics from the stage. What I found is a lot of people were coming to me and were like, how do you do that? How do you get up there? And I started supporting people in overcoming their fear of public speaking, organizing their material, understanding the psychology and the neuroscience behind how a person perceives another person's information and how to create more engagement, more connection, so that lands. And today I created a company called Leadership Communication, which sits at the intersection between leadership, communication, and collaboration. And I help leaders elevate their communication.
Wow, you grew up in Kansas. You're inspired by the work that your father was doing. You found yourself being called upon to do similar things in college. You created this organization, and you mentioned some of my favorite topics: communication, multiculturalism, neuroscience, understanding. Can't wait to dive into all of those things. So walk us through what led to the creation of the organization. What transpired between I went from college to having this organization?
Yeah. Growing up in Kansas, in Wichita, Kansas, I was in a very small bubble. And when I went to college, I went to the University of Kansas, go Jayhawks. And I started out in the International Hall, which had, 46 different countries represented. And every day I would just roam the halls or sit in the different lobbies and talk to people. And it really opened up my idea that it's not just this little box that I was living in. And it scratched an itch that I couldn't stop scratching. So when I graduated from college, I moved to New Zealand. Technically, I put a pen through a little squishy globe ball that we would throw around. I put a pen in Kansas. It came out in New Zealand. And I said, that's where I'm going. Furthest place on the planet from Kansas. Let's go. I was running away from myself in many ways, but I was also in search of something better out there, nirvana, like something. And I was looking for a place that I could belong. And it triggered about a decade-long search through many different countries and experiencing different realities, different perspectives of life. And it was a moment in Paris. I had gotten locked out of my youth hostel because I didn't get back in time, and so I was roaming around the Ile Saint Louis at like 2 o'clock in the morning, and I stopped and I looked at the Notre Dame, and is reflecting under the full moon on the River Seine, and I was like, it's a reflection. Everything out there is a reflection of what's going on in here. I need to stop trying to change the outside to make myself feel better. I need to start feeling better with myself. And that changed my path towards leadership, self expression, authentic expression, and enabling other people, empowering people to find ways to be their authentic self, especially when in the spotlight of speaking and so forth.
Oh, man. Yeah. That reflection piece is so powerful. And that you mentioned you went to New Zealand and then, 10 countries, and here you are in Paris, and the reflection and the belonging. What my brain immediately goes to is the belonging you were seeking was not in the external, what place do I belong? The belonging you were seeking is accepting of yourself, and how do I generate that belonging within myself? And and that is so powerful.
Yeah, and I think I left this out of the notes, but I would say that, as a gay man growing up in Kansas, where it was very conservative and very, I grew up at a time where they were still sending LGBT folks to hospitals to be retrained and reprogrammed. And so I was like, surely there's a place on the planet where it's okay to be this way. And today we have come so far in acceptance around LGBT. However, there is intense pushback as well. I guess this is my coming out story. When I finally accepted it for myself and started doing the work of accepting who I am in any of these spaces, that's when the transformation started.
That's really, really fascinating, Salvatore. One of the other guests we had on here, he mentioned that he was in his mid 20s, had obtained his master's degree, and was like, okay, now I can come out. Now I can share my identity, because maybe people will accept me now that I have enough other external things kind of supporting the internal who I am. And it's, first of all, my heart sinks when I hear that. I empathize and have this deep longing to say, I'm so sorry you experienced that in your life. And I hope whatever space you find yourself in, that you can celebrate the fullness of who you are.
I want that for everybody, and I appreciate what you're saying, and the what I feel at the moment is anger. Anger that I had to push up against, but at the same time, it was a blessing. It helped shape who I am. So gifts came from this ability. Like, it created a hypervigilance that is not necessary, but it attunes me to a room empathically. I can understand what's going on. I can read a room. And because of my ability to do this, I can train other people, coaching them to stand in front of people and read the room appropriately, to develop EQ, because I had to as a way of survival. It evokes a bit of a warrior energy in myself. And there's limit to how far I can push that. But I wish to empower anyone who feels like they don't belong in a space to be able to use tools and communication techniques to hold their ground and communicate with the agency that they have.
Yes, 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 absolutely. Empowering individuals to hold that space for themselves in the midst of the chaos,
Yeah.
and there's things happening that are beyond our control, right?
Mhm.
And but what we can control is who we are and how we engage with the world around us, right? I can control how I create belonging for people that I interact with day to day. I may not be able to change anything that's going on externally, but in my daily interactions, I can create that. And that's what I hear you saying. So when you think about the leaders that you've worked with, what's one of the single most important things a leader can do to enhance their communication with their team?
The single most important thing that a leader can do. There are a lot of things to focus on, and individually, each person has a particular quirk that they want to become aware of. Most of us aren't aware of what we don't know that we're doing. So getting feedback is important. Getting real-time feedback, asking somebody before a meeting, hey, give me some feedback at the end of this meeting. What did I do well? What could I have done better? Is the best way for a person to improve themselves. But in general, what I would say, my number one principle in communication is you, then me. The importance of speaking to the other person about what they're feeling, thinking, experiencing, wanting, know. Like if I can start any conversation or any talk or any answer to a question by talking to the person about what's going on in their mind, how they're thinking about this, developing the why it's important, tying the topic to the importance for that person, saying like, look, I know that you find this important because of, and I imagine that you are hoping for this outcome and worried about the risk of this happening. If I can build that start, talking about the you, before I get to me, my agenda, my perspective, my idea, then I create the opportunity for connection. Until a person knows that you understand where they're coming from, they can't lower their guard enough to listen to what you have to say. And it takes one person making that step and acknowledging, validating, expressing an understanding for where that person is standing before getting into my opinion. Then we create a connection. We can start building from there.
Yeah,
You,
yeah.
then me.
Yeah, it's really a powerful lesson what you're saying about the you then me. What you're guiding leaders to do is to recognize that the person they're interacting with is important. They matter. Their ideas, their perspectives are valuable. And in order for them to make that connection, they really need to focus on understanding that person first before bringing forward their own perspective, their own ideas, their own goals. I often run into leaders struggle with, they say, well, people look to me to know all the answers. But what you're saying is the you, then me is focus on them first.
I love that you brought that up. So many people think communication or Q&A or any of that is about having that perfect, I need to know all the answer. And it's not a test. The communication is not a test of a person's knowledge. It's a test of the relationship. It's a test of trust. Communication is constantly building trust, and building trust starts by me expressing my understanding for your place and position before diving into the next position or the next thought or whatever it is, mostly.
Yeah, yeah. Another interesting thing I think is often that people on the top list of fears that people have, public speaking is like next to dying alone.
There is a study that they did. It wasn't in America, but they did a study. They are recreating this research to determine what is the number one fear that people face, and that is people would rather die than they would speak. There is a natural fear of being in front of people, and there are so many reasons. And for the last 20 years, I have been traveling the world. I worked for 3 international communication firms, teaching their curriculum, going into corporations as a corporate trainer and teaching presentation skills and presence skills and storytelling skills. And everybody has some degree of a fear of public speaking. And there is a biological component to this. Our amygdala fires whenever we have a dozen eyes facing us, because our primate brain was like, oh, it's not good to be in this place. I need to find a way out. So like there's a primal instinct to duck and cover when there's a bunch of hungry eyes looking at us. And there's a whole other subset of what's going on behind the scenes for that person that's driving a fear of getting up there. I kind of feel like it is a little bit different for each person, what it is that creates that fear. And I think there's a baseline of not everybody feels comfortable to be themselves in front of these situations, or I'm not exactly sure how I'm supposed to behave in the situation, because as we grew up, we were rewarded for behaving properly in a certain context. And there are contexts where we get into where we're not completely confident we have all the tools to behave correctly. And can I be myself fully? Do I belong here enough that I can be messy and be my full self? Or do I need to make sure that I'm perfect and polished and all this stuff? And did I just skip a word and did I say that wrong or whatever it is? That is driving an innate fear of just getting up and riffing in front of an audience, so to speak. I'm curious to hear, in your experience or in the people that you've encountered, where has fear of public speaking shown up?
Yeah. It's, for me, I've done executive coaching since 2008. I would say if I were to come up with the underlying message that I hear consistently, it's I'm not good enough. It's the I'm not a good enough leader. I'm not a good enough mother. I'm not a good enough son. I'm not a good enough, professional, whatever. It's just that I'm not good enough and then fill in the other. It's that fear of I'm not good enough that I think is at the root of whatever it is the individual is endeavoring to do. It's this fear of not being good enough, and that message has formed in that person's mind over their lifetime, to your point of we get rewarded for behaving appropriately in a particular context. What is appropriate in whatever context this person is? And so my experience has been the link is to that I'm not good enough. Then I want to know your thoughts on this, Salvatore. What's the step that inspires the individuals to move from that fear, to step out and risk and courageously move?
I appreciate the question because it asks me really what drives a person to work with me. Because like what is the point that a person says it's more important that I learn how to overcome any obstacles to my communicating effectively in all these situations? It could be a desire to advance in a career. It could be a realization that somebody else got the promotion, not you, because of this. It could be the feedback that somebody got at a 360 and told them that they're, or a quarterly review that they're not, or a person that's just not advancing. Or it could be when the message becomes more important than how I show up. When I believe in what I'm saying to such an extent that it doesn't matter, I need to get this message out there. That's when it becomes critical for me to overcome any obstacles or fears I have in order to get that message out there, to express it, to learn to be myself in that. Um, when I'm coaching somebody around making that transition, so they've had some sort of a hero's journey where they've had an experience and now they need to find a mentor or somebody to help them move to the next stage. When they get to me, what I start to look at is, first of all, I need to just qualify that all communication is contextual, right? It depends on who I'm talking to, what I'm talking about, and the environment in which I am communicating. So there's not an across the board like brushstroke that I can make that's going to that work. But in any context, the first thing I need to think is like, what is it I'm truly trying to achieve here? If I want to come across fully and overcome my fear and say what needs to be said in this meeting, what is really my objective? Is my objective to make the message important? Like, what is that? That's going to drive how I show up. And when I talk about overcoming this like hesitancy to be seen, I talk about it in terms of relatability. We are all conditioned as a very young child how to behave in certain situations. And we either are conditioned to show up with a high agency or a high relatability. We've been taught when this person comes up to you, you need to make sure that you have this response. Or, and when we're in this situation, we need to, make ourselves a little bit smaller and make ourselves a little bit like deferential to make sure, right? And contextually, both ends of the spectrum are going to be appropriate in a different situation. The question becomes, am I defaulting to a behavior because of the way I was conditioned through systemic racism, through oppression in this area, through failures in this way? What's the drive that makes me choose to be more agency, using the full breadth of my body, using the full strength of my voice when I'm communicating, owning a pause so that I can command the room? Versus, when is it appropriate for me to just like make myself small and make sure that the other person feels safe enough to express what's really underneath and going on and understanding, right? My ability to start learning where am I on this continuum as a default state in different contexts allows me to start mastering the ability to show up with full agency in all situations appropriately. And that in turn drives the ability to overcome the fear of any kind of public speaking or whatever.
As I listened to you talk, I thought to myself that one of the things that you're really saying without saying is you're teaching people to gain self-awareness of those factors about themselves, what they're doing that maybe they unconsciously don't know. So gaining self-awareness, but then you're helping guide them to be authentically themselves and show up authentically in those spaces and recognize that no one style of communication or type of or approach is going to fit every context they find themselves in. So that really ties into the work that we do with intercultural communication, helping individuals to understand how the culture of who they are. Often people think culture is some foreign land. I learn about foreign people, but culture begins with that familial, the family culture that I grew up in and what was expected of me in terms of how to behave. And then my family is operating within the context of a community culture. And that community is operating within the confines of a national or a regional culture. Then if you go into the organization side of things, you've got organizational culture. So many cultures going on and us understanding that. Go ahead.
Yeah, what I like about that cultural pyramid that you just built is that's also a strategy in speaking in the you then me principle. When I begin speaking, if I can speak to the person on the different cultural levels, what's going on in that person's world, what's going on in that person's nation, community, and their familial and their individual, if I can speak to those matters for the person, or organizationally, if I'm in front of a group of people in my team at a business or something like that, how can I speak to them about what's happening globally for a company, what's happening for the company, what's happening in our industry, what's happening for our team? It's identifying the cultural influences to a particular situation. And people ask me, can you teach empathy? And I would argue that you can. It's a thing. It's almost like doing reps in a gym. If a person can take the time to learn to speak on that pyramid of cultural significance, cultural influences going on in that person's mind, speaking about those things before getting to their own agenda, there develops a sense of empathy because a person has to start understanding that world before getting into their own position, rather than just responding. So I love it. And I also appreciate that you brought up the awareness. People always ask me, Salvatore, how can I have more presence in a meeting, right? What's the trick to showing up with presence? And self-awareness is a key. It's one of the core 3 pillars of presence. Like, I need to be able to inspire trust in other people. I cannot inspire trust in other people if I'm not trusting myself, if I don't have the self-awareness of what's going on in myself and how I'm holding myself and what are the factors that are influencing the way I'm showing up today. I can't inspire other people to see me with presence if I'm lacking the ability of understanding what's going on for me right now.
Yeah, one of our core ideas is in Helen Fagan Associates is we do this work because people matter. And what you're doing is you're helping people to realize who they are matters and to own that and to bring that into the context that they find themselves in. And I love that you're doing this work, because what you're doing is you're helping leaders really, you're inspiring them.
Well, and you gave me chills with, like, because people matter. And I'm sorry to say this so bluntly, but we're in an age right now where there is a lot of loud voices that are trying to tell us that certain people don't matter. And I believe that the majority of us do believe that, but we're trying to convince or be heard or quiet the voices that are saying that there are some of us who don't. People matter. All of us matter.
Absolutely.
You know?
I would agree with you 100%. Anytime I've worked with any organization, any executive, I will say, what's the most important resource that you have? It's always people. Hands down, people, they will tell me it's my people. It's their talent, it's their passion, it's their whatever. It's the people. And so, because people matter, if your people matter, you as a leader need to gain the ability to help bring those individuals together and help them to be successful at pursuing their passion, their talent, and giving of their skills and all those things that make them your greatest asset.
Yeah. There's one of my favorite books is Leadership and Self-Deception.
Oh God, yes. I love that book.
And it is that, like, to get back to what I said and tied to what you said, we're in a moment where there's a transactional activity happening at a level that is unseen of before, that there are people who are operating from a purely transactional place and making it seem like that is okay. It is not okay. Transactional has a need for an emergency, maybe, but the transactional we need to be able to build relationships in order to build something that's sustainable. Yeah.
Yeah. There's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And the relationship is the essential piece to going far. And so what you're talking about is, while there are seasons or times when transactional is essential and necessary, when we think about leaders and the role of a leader and the leadership as a process, it is so much more about the relationship than the transaction.
And creating a false sense of crisis and keeping us in a state of crisis to make us believe that it's okay to be transactional is an illusion. Because at some point, we have to stop and take a breath and look at the damage that has been done from all these transactions without relations, and leaving ourselves not just alone, but like in a very weakened condition where we have aligned people, adversaries against us because we're not building relationships. It also gets into the high context, low context. We talked a little bit about this, and I don't claim to know it completely, but I have found that Americans in general can, or in certain situations, be a little bit more transactional, whereas in other cultures, especially cultures I've lived in, there's more relational. There's a more emphasis on building a relationship before we get to the business one. But I would love to hear more from you. Like, I know you have a depth of experience around high context.
Well, Dr. Hall, Edward T. Hall, was known as the father of intercultural communication. And he's the person that coined the terms high and low context, right? So, okay, high context is one that emphasizes indirect communication and nonverbal cues, right? So, high context means you understand what I'm saying without me saying it, right? So, Southeast Asian, my country of birth, Iran, higher context than United States, low context, everything has to be spelled out. And all you have to do is to travel internationally to an airport and to see high context, low context expressed in how much instruction is written out, information is written out versus there's just signs and it's understood. So in the high context, people assume you know. In low context, everything has to be spelled out. And because what you're just describing, Salvatore, everything has to be spelled out, it tends to be more transactional. While in high context, in order for me to know how you operate, I got to know who you are. And I think if I think about my own personal programming, for me, it's really important to know the people, which is part of the reason I start every podcast episode with tell me who you are. Who you are is as important as what you do, because I come from that high context background. It was an expectation. And even though I've been in this low context environment for over 40 years, I still cannot turn that off. Right. And so what you're describing here is really what Edward T. Hall, the father of intercultural communication, coined and began to teach as effective communicators. Leaders often have to balance that clarity, the relationship with the complexity. How do you get them to understand that? What do you offer these leaders to be able to navigate this effectively?
I love this question. Yeah, I work a lot. And I spent about 20 years in the Bay Area, and most of those were working with tech firms, scientists, STEM professionals, analytical brains who get up in front of people and want to over explain. And perhaps if I gave you all of the detail, then it would just make sense to you. And it doesn't always work that way for a non-STEM professional, non-analytical. And our own ability to be concise and clear around complexity is critical to our message landing and moving people to action. There are two things that I often recommend for people as they are attempting to take the complex into a simple form. First is say all of it again, but half as many words. First iteration is always going to have more. We're looking for the words, we're looking for the right words. And how do we say this? So practice saying the things that are most important. If you have an expertise, write down what are the 10 points that from your expertise that you can share with another person, and get those 10 points down to what we call sound bites. That's a media speak for you, Twitter, the headlines. If you're on camera, you don't have time to explain. You might just be able to use that soundbite. And if you have a practice 10-point sound bites, you're going to be more effective. So spend time in advance developing your own toolbox of sound bites that you're going to use. But challenge yourself through the muscle experience, sort of like doing reps in the gym again, of say it in half as many words. Keep working on concise. Now that you've developed concision, the second key is making complexity relatable. The easiest way to do that is in developing your ability to speak in metaphor or analogies. Right? A fun tool is just to grab anything close to you and talk about how is that thing like the thing that you do. Well, this coffee cup is like communication because it holds all of this vast knowledge, but unless you know how to use it, it's never going to feed the person the knowledge that you want to feed them. Okay, that was a rough job, but you get the idea, right? Practice with metaphors, practice with analogies. Do you want to play? Grab something on your desk. Tell me how it is like.
Okay, I've got this drink. So, okay, as a researcher, though, when we're going through our academic training at the doctoral level, we are taught to go deep in a single subject, right? Topic. Go deep in a single subject. So we go deep in a single subject, and then sometimes we get stuck down in the bottom of this. But the person who's not done the depth of work can't follow us because they're not even in the same space, but we're trying to get them to see this. So we as researchers have to gain the ability to be able to take our knowledge and make it applicable to the person who's not had that depth of study and say, "Hey, this applies to you in this way."
And I understand you more, so I can speak on more relatable terms to what's going on. I'm not just speaking on a global sense, I might be speaking at the individuals, right? The closer we can get down to the individual, that's when the relationship happens. And then when I can do the you and me and talk about what's going on for that individual person in my listening audience, that's when true connection starts to happen. And from that connection is where you build engagement. And from engagement is where you build change, action, and influence.
Yeah. You mentioned something earlier. You talked about the storytelling. And then you talked about it from an analogy or a metaphor and a leader's ability to be able to do that. In what ways do you teach leaders to be better storytellers?
Emotion precedes cognition. Something to keep in mind. Emotion precedes cognition. The study, the Wayland research from 1998 or that area where they had people at MRIs that showed them images, and they noticed that the amygdala was firing, responding to the stimulus before the brain actually had a full cognition of what was going on. So what this tells us is that when we are communicating to other people, they're having an emotional response before they start being rational and start processing what's said. Data speaks, but stories will move people to action. Using stories is a way of creating, it fires mirror neurons. It creates a lived experience. If I can get a true sense of your hero in the story, what they're going through and how it's going to benefit, how it benefited them, I am able to see myself in that scenario. I'm able to feel myself experience the highs or the lows of that story, the hero in the story, and then whatever argument you're making, whatever point you're trying to make, it's going to land further because you've ignited in me an emotional response that I can then feel and feel a lived experience, and then I can turn it into action for myself. So I don't know at what point it became really important to speak in stories, but I do know that I remember there was a point early in my career when I was going into organizations where they weren't as concerned about storytelling, and then they started calling to me like, "We need storytelling training. We need storytelling training," and coming in and helping people to tell better stories. And what I would offer is that, when I started, I always thought, I'm not a good storyteller. That person, like, oh yeah, that person, that's a good storyteller. You should go to there. And then I realized it's a matter of using the right elements and using it in the right structure. You've got a great story. It's just a matter of learning the elements, learning the structure, and then putting it through the muscle reps at the gym until it becomes an innate sense of creating stories out of whatever it is you want to create.
It's so good. Salvatore, I have 3 grandsons, and they're ages 3, 4, and 7, okay? And 2 of them absolutely love to make up these really great stories and tell me these great stories. The logical part of me could go, "Well, yeah, no, that isn't accurate. You can't make that work in that. Dinosaurs don't have engines," or something like that. I could tell them that, right? But I want to build their ability to tell stories, so I don't tell them that. I let them go these wild places, and I listen, and I go, "Oh, wow. That is so cool." And you know what I mean? I really go in it with them because I agree with you that storytelling is such a powerful tool for all parts of our lives. I grew up, my dad was so good at storytelling. He would tell me these stories about these things and talk about the families they had and the things they were doing. I would totally get lost in the story and the fear would subside, right? And so that's what I want to create for my grandkids, that ability to get lost in the story, both the developing and telling it, and not so much the other piece of it. And what you're describing here goes to that fear of public speaking, right? When we develop that in kids early on, that we're willing to listen to their stories wherever it goes, I think we help kind of break down those fears a little bit. And so such powerful wisdom.
It's so beautiful, and I often will coach my clients to consider when they were children or consider children, because there's something so innocent in a child's ability to just express themselves. And we at one point all had that and decided that we couldn't do it in this context. I would argue that we can bring a lot more of our childlike self, of curiosity, expression, of animation into the boardroom as well. People don't want to sit there and listen to the report that you have on the data that you have. People want to listen to something that is engaging. And the person that brings the full breadth of their voice, their body, and their imagination to the topic, that's engaging. That's when people lean in. Adopt the mindset of your grandchildren and let that creativity flow and let the expression flow. And we only know how far we can go when we've gone too far. So yes, there's going to be a moment where I've made a silly fool of myself in a situation. But in doing those in the smaller contextual situations, learning to express myself more when I'm just with my team gives me the strength and confidence to switch to the all hands or in front of the media and still be myself, still retain that self-awareness becomes strong enough that I can project the confidence of knowing who I am and show up fully using the entire instrument that I have to communicate what I need to communicate.
Oh, Salvatore, I can tell you and I could go on for hours. First of all, congratulations on the playbook you've got coming out. I could learn from you so much, and I know our audience can learn from you so much. Would you tell us a little bit about your playbook that you've got coming out and where our audience can learn more about you, your work, the playbook? Please.
Thank you. The You Then Me playbook. It's my book that's going to be coming out soon. And I grew up as an introvert, learned that in an extroverted world, they're teaching people how to polish extroverted skills to become public speakers. And so I stepped back and said, okay, what are the ways that anybody can become a better communicator? And so I developed frameworks for organizing your context, techniques for how to deliver that, and principles for how to show up as a leader in different contexts of situations. So it's the You Then Me playbook. Hopefully it'll come out in the next couple of months. And they can find it at youthenmeplaybook.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I love to hear from people. What was your fear? What did you do to overcome your fear? How do you empower people to get up and be their authentic selves in front of other people? So please feel free to reach out. And thank you, Helen. It's been great to be on here. I appreciate your wisdom. I appreciate all the awareness that you're bringing to people, because people matter.
Thank you, Salvatore, for being here and giving of your time and your expertise. I know I personally am better because of you, and I know our audience will be as well. Thank you.
This has been Because People Matter, a podcast about celebrating leaders who are harnessing the best of each team member while driving success in their organizations and communities. You can find links to any resources mentioned in today's show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. Thank you for listening. Because People Matter is brought to you by Helen Fagan & Associates. We are changing the world one leader at a time. Go to helenfagan.com to learn more about what we can do for your organization. That's helenfagan.com. HELENFAGAN.com.